You've been subjected to a highly sophisticated form of propaganda.
It's just what you need, not what you don't.
Hey, it's me. How you doing, man?
Man, did I mess that one up. I was trying to do this.
Good morning.
Good morning, folks. Yeah, here I am. Here I is. Flash, bam, swoosh, zip, blammo. The title of today's show is McKenna's Novelty to the Singularity, which isn't exactly like the words he would necessarily use. But anyway, it's October 21st in the calendar year 2021. Today is a Thursday, and it's 4:40 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time, as I mess with the microphone as usual. He did the mash. He did the monster mash. So I'm had my oats. Phase 1, in which Tony had his oats. And I'm drinking remnants, I guess the last couple days of my, or day or two of my Kona coffee blend. Not bad. I noticed that less is more flavor, it seems. I've also noticed that my TV, it's my TV that cuts, the screen cuts about I don't know, 1/16 of an inch to 1/4 of an inch off of the border of this. If that's happening to you, leave on your screen, on your TV screen, if you watch this on TV, leave a message in the comments bar, location, area, down below. But yesterday I was waiting for this guy to come and do the furnace thing who I never showed. And I'm still beat because yesterday I did this crazy job, and I think I have it under grow room here. Okay. I don't know if you could really grasp this. All right. Let me explain so it makes a little more sense. Okay. On the two ends are where I sawed open the wall. And you kind of could see on the left-hand side the greenish, I took the sawzall. And then you see some insulation from the ceiling. This is the roof. This is the third floor attic. Now I'm heading towards the roof. This is the leak. The one where the guy was I sent the guy away, was supposed to try to get up on the roof because he didn't know what he was doing. He would have killed himself. He would have needed a 40-foot, ladder that was, foldable and stuff. He didn't have the right stuff. I didn't need that stuff. Insurance or no insurance, I don't want a dead guy on my property, put it that way. And on the left side would be the other, board in between this rafter or whatever. Excuse me. Now, underneath this black kind of shiny mess, which I'm hoping I didn't screw up by doing this. In other words, there's a sealant under there, but I'm hoping that the plastic I put over top of it doesn't keep it from drying. And there's a possibility that I may have screwed up. I thought of it as an extra layer. But yesterday afternoon when I went up, it was still mushy. And I don't think it should have been. I also noticed I put plastic to hold back some of, in the lower right-hand corner, you can see a little yellowish thing. That's a little bit of that big gap filler stuff. And it wasn't yet put on when I took this picture, but I had some of that above. And I put some plastic there too. And I noticed a portion of that was staying liquidy. So almost like this stuff has to react to air. And I hope I didn't screw up because we're talking a couple $100 worth of stuff here. But behind this black layer covered with plastic were the original grooves that were open to the sky, basically, where the water was coming in. I filled those with a 100% weatherproof sealant. Then I covered the weatherproof sealant with a mesh, the kind of mesh you might use on drywall. You know, the stuff that's kind of sticky. So I covered those slats with that. And then I put this black, which is a professional grade roofer's sealant over top of that. And I just went for it and covered it all. And then I put a piece of plastic over top of it. And then in certain areas, like above that green at the top, which is like the roof, but where there were still some holes that I did the same stuff to, I filled that with this big gap filler to apply pressure so that even this pouring, pounding rain or something couldn't like dig through the holes. There's the logic behind it. Whether or not it works, I don't know. I haven't gone up this morning. It's 4:46. I'm still tired, like I always am when I start the show. So it's like, you know. Even that does nothing for me. So the title of this show is like multi-titled. I get this idea like stuff speeding up. And like this whole thing, you know, because I really want to put this thing towards the end, but for some people it will be cutting off like a portion if you're watching this on a TV, maybe. I don't know. I have to check to see if I, for some reason, have my TV like in some kind of enlargement mode. I don't think I do. So to play it safe, you know, but I should just pay attention to the playback from Google, and on Google it looks fine. So I guess I'm just going to ignore that for now. So what you see is what you get, like the song goes. That's a great tune, by the way. Really great tune. But before the CPU gets any worse, what we're going to do is I'm going to take you on the video capture here. And that's not supposed to be the Thunderbolt display. But at least you get a glimpse at it. What we want to go is the McKenna's Time Wave 0, which I don't know why we're not going to that. I think what has to happen is it has to be the foreground window. Yeah. All right, so let's do that. And I just was going to use this as a, here's an old-fashioned website that looks like it was built with like Claris homepage or something. The old days. Survived since McKenna had this software out that like he was figuring time out. I used to watch him a lot. He was an interesting character, I only ever did mushrooms twice. Once was a kind of a pretty fun, laughing, and then kind of weird experience with lights. And then the other one was like interrupted by someone, which I think I may or may not have told that story. Well, anyway, what McKenna is saying here, what they're saying here, that, but it's like McKenna and his brother, they wrote this book. McKenna had this idea, and they created a software program, which I wouldn't mind getting. It's called Time Wave 0, was the original version, and apparently it was changed to Fractal Time. And let me just do a click here to see if it's still available at this site. This site can't be reached. Okay, so it's not even available. So if you're lucky enough, and it was a featured DOS Windows Time Wave software. So if you're lucky enough to have an old, IBM DOS machine, running like whatever Windows from the 90s. And on top of that, you could get a copy of this Terrence McKenna thing. But see, all that stuff is just gone. Well, anyway, his idea was that, and they worked on this software program to demonstrate it. Time was considered similar to fractals. And this software program allowed you to break down any time down to a smaller part of 92 minutes. I mean, this sounds really far out if you think about this. But the idea was that time was speeding up. Everything was speeding up. And that, let me just I'll only read something out of this. The primary function of the software is to display any portion of the time wave up to 7 billion years as a graph of the time wave related to the Western calendar, Gregorian or Julian. You can display the wave for the entire 4.5 billion year history of Earth. Note the peculiarities at the wave at such points as the time of the extinction of the dinosaurs, and inspect parts of the wave as small as 92 minutes, as I said. Software provides several ways of manipulating the display. Now, the idea was, and I could have sworn, let me see if I go back, if this takes me. In a nutshell, novelty theory is a pseudoscience. They love to say pseudoscience when any individual comes up with something. Idea that purports to predict the ebb and flow of novelty in the universe as an inherent quality of time, proposing that time is not a constant but has various qualities tending toward either habit or novelty. All right. What is novelty theory? It's the same thing there. Novelty theory, Wiktionary. Nothing. Now let's go back to Terrence McKenna on Wikipedia. McKenna formulated a novelty theory regarding the nature of time based on fractal patterns, which he claimed discovered in the I Ching, and predicting a transition of consciousness in the year 2012. Of course, that never happened. Despite the pseudoscientific nature of novelty theory, promotion of its ideas and its connection to the Mayan calendar helped fuel widespread beliefs about 2012, eschatology or whatever. Anyway, that's novelty theory. It's kind of interesting. We thought we'd talk about that as a point of departure. Daily flow freedom is fun. Stuff speeding up. Anyway, I'll get back into this thing. And sorry about keep that thing. But let's get into this.
The Weather Watch forecast.
All right, so here's what it's looking like outside in the great blue yonder, which isn't really blue right now. It's nighttime in the former United States. And yeah, a couple of days of this working out, doing this weird, trying to fix a roof from the inside is just totally kind of burned me out. But I don't know. I seem to have picked up yesterday after the show, so I don't know. he drinks a cup of coffee, which is already like losing its heat. I wish McKenna had an answer for that. So today we're in my area originally, and the reason I was in such a hurry to do this thing was the forecast was for rain and thunderstorms, and it's still a 60% chance of that. Though sunrise is going to be 7:33, at 8 a.m. the sky is supposed to be clear, which is good, because I'm going to go upstairs around that point and try to finish off some of the final touches. It's 52 degrees, and it looks like it's one of those days where instead of getting cooler, it's going to warm up because there's some kind of front coming in. And you can see from looking at the clouds from, in the midsection heading east that there's movement as I predicted a couple of days ago. Anyway, we're supposed to get up to 72 and rain. Friday, it's supposed to rain. Saturday, it's supposed to rain. Sunday, there's 50% chance of a thunderstorm. Monday is 70% chance of rain. So you understand why I was in like this rush to do this crazy roof thing, and ended up doing, that, whatever that is. I'll give you an update on it tomorrow. So if you're in the Northwest, or even in parts of California, you got there's some cloud action happening over there. The Great Plains are semi-clear, but there's a lot of action in the middle of the country building up. The Great Lakes seems to be there's something going on there, and I guess it looks like that rain, this big white thick clouds, depending on how far south they come, I guess is whether or not I'm going to get hit, because I'm south of that. But anyway, that's that. Florida, you look okay. Texas, you're kind of okay, except on northeastern, so to speak, quadrants. And the Atlantic Ocean is like pretty much clean. So that's that.
The Weather Watch forecast.
Yeah, so here we are.
Surprise, surprise, surprise.
It's me again. Look like an old timer. Guy called me an old timer. It's pretty funny. That's like when a woman, some kid calls a woman, "Hey, lady," or Mister, first time somebody calls you like Mister or lady, some girl gets called lady by a kid. And you're like, Mister, I'm just a kid. What are you talking about? I'm not, an old timer. It's weird. Life. I don't know. It's life. So, as usual, just a reminder for new people, the sun is the source of our light and heat on this planet, and it protects us. Its magnetic field protects us. It also represents a clear and present danger to the earth, because not only does it give us that beautiful vitamin D and helps the plants grow and photosynthesis and all that beautiful stuff, but it and upon itself, has these nova events, not supernovas, but where it CMEs, and it expels its shell every 12,000 years. And those are usually near extinction events on the earth. He says, like, totally nonchalant with this like weird smile on his face. You know, it's kind of crazy, but it's true. And maybe, you know, McKenna hit on something there, you know, in his whole idea. And the title card of this show, I'm just showing this like blur, you know, photographic effect of, you know, cars, you know, cars coming at you, cars going away from you, you know, obviously those the headlights versus the, you know, the backlights. But the idea is that stuff's speeding up. And if you listen to McKenna himself talk about it, not me trying to read this old website that just was poorly put together about a software program that apparently no longer exists, but if you have one in an old machine, that would be great. I don't even have an old Windows machine here. So I've got old Macs, you know, but I don't have any old Windows machines. There's a rumor I mentioned before that they were going to put out an updated version of XP out. I don't know if that's true or if that's just like a internet rumor, you know, an elaborate like internet hoax that sometimes people put these things together. It was like this thing I watched, and I apologize for the freezing up that's about to occur, but just hang in there. It seems to have fixed itself. I don't know. Maybe you're not supposed to talk about McKenna or the sun or something. I don't know. Or I'm getting into something that the die hold, as this vote guy talks about, doesn't want me to talk about. You know, I think I just might get spacey. You know, it's Halloweenish time and stuff. I was watching this thing and it was like this thing about this. It looked like it might have been contrived and created by people. It reminded me of the old internet where people used to do these things, but obviously there was production involved in it. And it was about, you know, what was it called? It was something about they would find these odd things. It would either be a thing, some kind of living organism, or something that was discovered, and then there was this organization whose job it was to secure it and, you know, and basically make sure that it, you know, wasn't, you know, was safe, kept it safe from the rest of us, the world. And some of the things that were on this were just really just outrageously freaky. And the way it works is that I could try doing this. Let me just go new window. YouTube. I have one account, but it's like two different accounts in one regard. And what happens is, let's see here. Yeah. I would have to like switch accounts to try to find the history from that other one. And I'm afraid if I switched accounts, well, I don't know, maybe if I switch on this, I know, there is an answer here. I'm going to have to open up another browser. If for some reason things freeze up, just fast forward. If I'm like that or something, just fast forward, and you know the show will go on. I have to find the name of this. I don't like talking about something I don't, you know, that's like, it's interesting. It's tied into today's topic, and but for the life of me, I forget exactly what it was. All right, so let's go to history. Because I know this was one of the last things I watched. And for some reason, even on Safari, it had, because I'm logged in. So the login must go beyond. This is really weird. It must go beyond your it's the ROCKFLUX account. Let's see, because I'm afraid if I change this, I might lose the whole thing. Let's see, history. SCP, okay? All right. And so what you want to do is you want to search for there's these videos, the top 22 scariest SCPSs. And what they are, is I'm going to have to even open one so, I can see what the name of this is. This could cause all kinds of problems, but I want to let you know what the name of this thing, what this stands for. Okay.
Censored beats in this video are classified names or locations that are withheld from public hearing and are therefore edited for legal reasons from the SCP agency.
Okay, so SCP means secure, contain, protect.
In association with the SCP website.
And they have some kind of, there's these various classifications of them. One's called safe. Objects that are anomalies are either sufficiently understood that they are now completely and reliably contained on a permanent basis. Euclid class objects are anomalies that are either insufficiently understood or inherently unpredictable, such that reliability containment is not always possible, and they pose a threat. And then Keter objects are anomalies that pose an imminent threat to the safety of the Foundation, personnel, and the rest of mankind, and either require extensive and complex procedures to contain or cannot fully contain by the Foundation. All right? So you get that? It's SCP, secure, contain, protect. All right. And I'm still broadcasting, apparently. So, and I was watching some of this stuff. So SCS, like in, safe, C as in contain, and P as in protect. All right. You want to go down a rabbit hole? Look up SCP on YouTube and some of these like top 22, whatever. And like I say, some of the stuff looks like, like it just might be somebody put, like the old time internet where people used to put these things just to freak people out. And it is Halloween season. I don't know how it came up on mine. I didn't search for it. But some of the stuff is really weird. And then when I was thinking about the idea that like maybe it was somehow manufactured, the idea is that even though, the video had all the elements of like, the shaky video, weird, the text being covered over, and the voices, the so-called government type of presentation that would be the last way the government would present something. Kind of like the UFO autopsy video stuff. You know what I'm talking about? Even though it was like that there were like, the two I had watched, I don't think I finished the one with 24, but there were like 22 I went through, and then the other ones I got halfway through, maybe 24. different SCP things, phenomenon, and these things that were in these containment areas. That the production and creation and the visual effects, you know, however crude and weird it was to make it crude and weird and whatever, still involved a lot of production, you know, when you think about it. I mean, they had these things in these cages, these things moved, you know, they were weird. The quality was really bad, was poor, like it was taken from, you know, security cameras. See, sometimes making something look bad, right, is just as hard or harder than actually trying to make something look, you know, real, especially in today's, you know, with today's technology we have, where, you know, with CGI and the abilities to do things, etc. So it's just really weird. And so whether or not there's any truth to any of this stuff or not, I have no idea. It's just something weird, and it's Halloween. And if you want to, like, you know, want to just watch something weird, kind of, some of the stuff, you would be considered scary to some people, you know. I mean, just really weird creatures, weird things, just really odd, bizarre. And it also gets you thinking into, because it's not just this, but this is something I haven't thought about in a long time, but I've come across over the years, is that there are things in this world that are classified or just not spoken about, or that, you know, people ended up in mental wards or whatever, you know, who swore by, that are so far out that and unexplainable that, you know, it goes beyond, you know, our comprehension and beyond the idea of you know, some kind of ridiculous fake. And, you know, and the fact that this has been happening for decades and decades, way before, you know, sophisticated CGI, and some of this stuff is really old, just reinforces that idea that there's something to, put it this way, like I always used to say, it's like the old UFO argument, which actually doesn't even come true anymore now that they've kind of fessed up to, you know, UFOs. But the idea was always, even with Project Blue Book, you know, legitimate, you know, when the government was originally fessed up, you know, in their press releases and in their documents, they still always had said that, you know, the thing that the media would play on, like the media does today, same kind of nonsense. They play with percentages and stuff. They would say, well, 90-some% of this stuff is just some sort of, you know, weather phenomenon, weather balloons, or some, you know, or just a, you know, a helicopter in the sky, or an airplane at night, or a reflection. You know, the classic, what is the one that Rex Bear always says, swamp gas. But there still were a small percentage that were completely unexplainable. And even back then, like 60 years ago, the government said that, right? Their group of scientists and researchers who were tasked with figuring this stuff out said that. And that should have been the headline, right? Because most people, see, this is how they insult our intelligence, our collective intelligence. Well, most people knew that, you know, like, for example, you know, the classic cigar-shaped UFO. And I kick myself because I have such great archives and I can't find it. Maybe someday I'll find it, but then I really will be an old timer. But when I was first on the internet in the 90s, I was all over that kind of stuff. And I was finding things and people were posting stuff. And there was old film footage. Because remember, the motion pictures have been around. It's like I did a show once where I was explaining, where I had that picture of Lincoln without a beard or a hat and stuff. I was explaining, the camera was, was around in the 1800s. This microphone is from the 1800s, I swear. I had to clean myself with turpentine yesterday, and then wash and scrub to get that out of my skin and pores. And it's no wonder. Poisoning myself, trying to fix a hole in the roof. What was I talking about? Oh. Well, people had taken, the idea, it's like when people find stuff in rocks, petroglyphs. It's like you don't take the time of doing elaborate carvings. I'm not talking about scribblings on rocks, which could well just be graffiti, from, ancient times. No, I'm talking about the sophisticated carvings, from Samaria to the dynastic period in Egypt and, Mayans and, Eastern cultures, India, whatever. You don't take the time to get elaborate with something unless it's of importance and worth preserving, right? And with the camera was the same way. People took pictures with the camera. First of all, it took a lot of time, because the exposure, you had to stand really still and stuff. And, they had these those flashes that they used. It was a complicated setup. It was not cheap. And, if the photographer came to town, or if you had a town photographer, yeah, it was a big deal, and usually photographs were made on special occasions, only. Unless the rich would have a family portrait. They used to do those death portrait things too, or whatever. But when the motion picture came along in the 1800s as well, later on, right? Moving pictures, I should say. That was even more rare. And so, so while some fortunate people, creative people who had financing, put them into entertainment and saw that there was a value that they could charge for people because of the reactions they saw when people saw, the arrival of a train, or the classic, the guy pointing the gun at the camera, people freaked out and fainted. That, but it was uncommon, put it that way. And that's all a build up to, I had found some videos of dirigibles, or what you would call, blimps, right? Like the Hindenburg type of thing. But early, airships. And someone had photographed these with a camera, 120 years ago or something. I mean, this thing, and it was a very small image, but it was real. And, it just looked like a cigar in the sky. And man, I kicked myself. I wish I had that to show you right now, but I don't have that anymore. I mean, this was when I was doing websites. Like I say, this is well over 20 some years ago. I mean, the file may exist somewhere in one of my terabyte drives that I haven't opened, in ages. But, when I heard the idea of, cigar-shaped UFOs, I always thought back to these old pictures of these early airships, which were, dirigibles. They didn't look like the Hindenburg. They didn't look like the Goodyear blimp. The early airships were pretty much looked like were cigar shaped. And so when I used to hear people talk about cigar shaped US UFOs, I used to always think, man, I've seen those, but they weren't UFOs. They were actually airships. And so, they insult our intelligence sometimes when they say, oh, this is swamp gas, or this is lights reflecting from the ground, car lights, highway lights in the distance, reflecting in the sky, or whatever. The various explanations that these, people that just spoil sports, basically, they don't let anybody just sit around and ponder, right? Or something you've seen firsthand and they're just trying to totally just, put the kibosh on it, before you could even talk about it, explain it, or, have fun with the conversation. But the idea is that, getting back to this whole idea, is that it's nothing new, like, the way the Navy came out and released these photos, and then the Pentagon saying, yeah, these are, this stuff has gone on and blah, blah, blah. Well, they did the same, and they did the same back in the 60s, When they ended Project Blue Book, and like I say, you can find those press releases and their videos of them. You could even get into Eisenhower's, idea of the military-industrial complex, that speech and stuff, that he was talking about something that had already existed. And so they were already experimenting. See, this is like, say, this gets a little semi-complex, but the idea is that there were already people trying to, some were trying, some could be looked at as the Roswell concept, right? So there were people trying to either cover that up or play with that or use it for some fear-mongering purpose or diversionary idea, or what's his name? I can't think off the top of my head, but, or reverse engineer, technology that could have been used. And who would be in the position to do that would obviously be the government, what's now DARPA, and the military-industrial complex, which really is just a collection and a word for, Lockheed Martin, Martin Marietta, right? These big defense contractors, right? That were creating these things. And you could see videos of these, and you've seen it, so I don't have to get into it, where they were messing around with round UFO type craft, things with, propellers that would come up and stuff like that, I mean, Britain came up with the Harrier jet before we released anything like that was basically, had its engines down and then went up. And I think Air Force One then used that, was like a Harrier technology where you have the jet engine facing the ground, pushing, upwards, right? And then the propellers take over and it flies off. As opposed to the Harrier, the jet engine just shifted and then, went off. But that's not the point. These are just all these interesting things. Technology has been advanced. It's like going back to, like I talked about before, the Park Project, Xerox PARC, P-A-R-C, where Jobs and, I believe, Gates both saw firsthand in the 60s where they had the mouse concept and the GUI, graphical user interface, basically 60 years ago. And yet the Mac didn't come out and literally steal that technology or whatever arrangement they made until 1985, really. 84, right? In the 80s, they were, Mac had Lisa and some of that other stuff. But the whole idea of the desktop publishing and the software that would eventually develop into what we depend on today, right? And we do depend on it. It's become such an integral part of society. Is really only, 30 years, it's like 35 years ago. That's not a long time. It's like I keep trying to tell people about the iPhone and stuff. Things like 12, 15 years old, apps and social media and smartphones. It's like they really didn't get big until about a decade ago, and they've only been around for about 15 years or so. That's not a really long time, and that's why I'm telling you that I still stand by the idea, mark my words, within about a year to 18 months, this is going to be a thing of the past. The next technology will replace it. Believe me. People will still have them, just like I still have an old G5 computer over here that's 15 years old. So yeah, some people won't let go of this thing for either reasons that they can't afford, to the new technology, or that just, they refuse to accept change. But anyway, back to this mystery, weird, craziness, this is called, this is this weird thing. Let's keep this in the background, maybe for a while. So, pouring coffee. The end of my coffee. So they admitted to us that there was a certain percentage, this is 60 years ago, a certain percentage of UFOs, this aerial phenomenon, etc., even abductions and that sort of thing, that were completely unexplainable. So they couldn't say, that they weren't an extraterrestrial, craft or whatever. And then today, 60 years later, or not today, but, in our time, they've admitted that maybe even a higher percentage of this kind of stuff is real, they physically, tangibly chased these things, I have this weird stuff that I just,
You're listening to Tony Caravan Live.
I just can't resist. I'm still trying to wake up. So, back to McKenna, those of you who came here for that. And anyone who doesn't know who McKenna is, though I think anybody on YouTube knows who Terrence McKenna is because they've you must have come across a couple of his videos. It's like Alan Watts. It's like YouTube has made guys like McKenna and Watts, famous, after their time. Though Watts would, I'm not putting them in the same category. Alan Watts is, from a philosophical standpoint, he was quite a guy. I have a lot of respect for Alan Watts. That's not to say I don't have respect for Terence McKenna, though, because if you really spend time listening to McKenna, and there are a few McKenna videos where you can actually see him like in his house, or he's, speaking. A lot of Watts' stuff, I would say the vast majority of Alan Watts is just his voice. Old recordings taken on a reel-to-reel, or maybe a cassette player if they had it at that, time. And, and then someone has remixed it, cleaned it up and added some freaky stuff to it or whatever. And McKenna, there's some of that stuff done with McKenna as well. But his idea about time was pretty interesting. This fractal idea. Because I don't know if you remember that I did a video, and you probably, it depends on whether or not you've ever watched my videos. But I did a video a long time ago, and I'm trying to find... It's my video capture device. Okay. I'm just trying to figure out what is what. The technology. The weird thing about being on the internet is that, okay, that's a display capture. I got you. Before I get into anything new, let's deal with the music. This is getting too far out. So before we get carried away on this, let's deal with the album of the day. And this is Todd Rundgren, Runt. And this is the one that he had this, that song, Leroy Boy, you're my friend. We've got to get you a woman. You've heard, I think everybody's heard that song by now. And that comes from this album. And there's a couple other fairly decent tracks on there. And there's some other stuff that you could see that is just, you could see the foundation of where he would go later on in life, musically, there's the beginnings and the playing of guitar, the structure of some of these other songs that you can see how other things, it's pure Rundgren, it's the study of an artist who's had an illustrious career, and really one of the best pop artists, out there, of consistently being able to produce these songs. He really knew how to put together a song, right? The structure of a song. And that's a rare thing. And he was a producer, musician, songwriter, singer-songwriter, the whole nine yards. And still to this day, if you want to see, there's an interesting video floating around at Daryl's house, that show that was running. And Rundgren, the last I heard of him, I think he actually owned a bar in Hawaii, but I know he lives there at least part of the year. And Daryl Hall took their crew at Daryl's house out to Rundgren's house, and they did some of the old songs and some, and Hall & Oates songs. And you could catch that on YouTube, and that's worth checking out. But anyway, Runt, This album is worth visiting. Many people might not know this album at all, even people who know Todd Rundgren and think of "Hello, It's Me," and that kind of stuff. Yeah, or know the song, "We Gotta Get You a Woman." Well, this is the album it came from. It's a different time, it's a different sound, but it's something worth exploring if you want to expand your music, your music mind. And if you're doing, like I always say, if you got something to do, a task to do, and you want some music to listen to while you're doing it, that's all. It's a good idea. Why just put on the radio and listen to the same old stuff, right? When you could just, expand your mind. Which brings us back into the McKenna kind of thing, although he was expanding it with mushrooms. I'm sure this thing on mushrooms might be interesting too. But anyway, Todd Rundgren, Runt, recommended album of the day. Okay. It's something that I would be listening to. I got to go deal with this later. But so this idea of McKenna and, his Novelty, is a lot of like what the Singularity is about. It's this idea that he had this thing, the way I heard him speak this. Not what we were reading on that, whatever that page is. I don't know what that was. It's like they hide these things from people, I guess because he was involved in mushroom, whatever, psilocybin research or something. I don't know. Mind expanding stuff, I have no problem with any of that stuff, Like I said, I've experimented with a couple of things over the years. I've done mushrooms a couple of times. I've done LSD a couple of times. I've smoked pot, and, so the idea is, it's like I went through those phases of different things. I'm just not a person that has sought that out and it continually used it, It's like, it's particularly in my younger years when, if the situation was right, and it was the right group of people or something like that, then yeah, I've done that sort of experimentation, but never to an extreme, because I didn't. The concept of being totally out of your mind just never appealed to me. What appealed to me more was the opening, and what, in my instance, in those few instances too. Like I'm not talking like some, McKenna, these guys did this stuff every day, in the few instances, in this mind, what they call mind expanding thing. It's like these people who do DMT and stuff like that. It's the idea of opening up something or seeing things in a different light and having this like aha moment, sort of, so to speak. But that, maybe pushing it too far might throw you completely over the deep end. And that's happened to some people, particularly with some of the more, the harder, drugs, where they've actually damaged their brain, Now and one could even argue, and I mean, even the idea of the daily pot smoker, I've known some people, they get up, they got to smoke pot. It wears off, smoke at lunchtime. And then they got to smoke at night. You know, watching nightly news. No wonder this world's messed up, this country. And then they might have to take a puff before they go to bed. Well, you could say pot's not addicting, but in the case of someone who smokes pot 3 to 4 times a day and basically is eternally stoned, I would say that's about as close to addiction as you can get. You can call it what you want. But you're in a different world and a different reality. And I remember being around, because I was around some people at younger times in my life where that was the norm. And yeah, you were in like kind of a different world. And I'm not criticizing that world necessarily, but it's like a different world, a different reality is what it really is. And, you know, and McKenna and these guys studied that. And, you know, I mean, you could go, you know, and it's no different than, you know, the LSD studies and stuff like that, which they're starting to get back into at some of the universities, even studying DMT and stuff like that. And seeing if there's, you know, the practical purposes and clinical uses of it, you know, so that, you know, it could actually help people, right? I mean, there's certain factors. I mean, that is the whole idea of medical marijuana right now, you know, is the idea that it's the medicinal effects, you know, warrant, that's their justification for selling it, warrant it. Though, you know, let's be honest, the majority of people who, you know, are getting gummies and all these other things, they're just getting high. You know what I mean? So it's, you know, and part of, it's like the Chinese, the opium wars or whatever you want to call it. You don't want, I don't think you want to be out of your mind all of the time. And, you know, it's like living in a different, it's almost like a different dimension. And that's like the, you know, with the people, like the psilocybin, extreme levels of psilocybin, the way McKenna really talked about. And like people that get into the DMT experiences and ayahuasca and that kind of thing. And you could find out information on this stuff on YouTube and see, you know, what people talk about their experiences and stuff and how it's changed their life and stuff. Well, whatever turns you on is the way I go. I don't like I say, I'm not against. I'm freedom. You know, that's a photo that keeps popping up. Of course, I have freedom is fun up there, but now I have it in a shirt, which you can get. So freedom is fun. You know, get one of those. So McKenna was saying that the way I understood it from some of his watching him speak for, you know, on video, not like, you know, some of this other stuff written about him. And I remember some of his some of his last speeches, you know, before he died, leading up to this idea where he had this idea that like by 2012 that time as we know it would end because every technology and everything was speeding up. Okay. So it would I don't think he used the word singularity. I don't know if he did or didn't. I can't recall. A little bit of a wheeze, and I know what that's from, and it's not a good thing. It's from all the chemicals that I had to breathe in doing this stuff yesterday. I'm telling you. Destroying my body. The only thing you can do is try to counter it with, you know, the healing part of your body and just hope. I can't wait till this roof thing is finished. I still have a couple more days up there, but I mean, I have to go up this morning and get this done before the next 4 days of rain. So, be that as it may, the idea is, in a nutshell, he was saying that he perceived things, and obviously perceived things, under the influence of psilocybin predominantly, that everything was speeding up. And he was right. I mean, it's like Moore's Law. I mean, so, see, this is the thing about, like I used to even find with, like I didn't smoke. I wasn't a big pot smoker in college. And in fact, if I smoked pot in college, I'd be the guy, they'd be like, don't jump out the window or something. Because I was the one who wanted, I would more like get into the mind expanding experience of like, contemplation and stuff like that. And, it was more of a personal experience with me, and opening up my mind, like clearing out the clutter. And then being, having, in other words, so there's so much garbage we have inside of ourselves. And this just doesn't have to be done with, with a drug. I mean, I would even, just having a few beers and happy hours for me at the end of the day was kind of like a similar thing. It was like, it's the whole idea of, people drink, they get rid of your inhibitions or whatever. But it wasn't so much inhibitions as it was just the layers of stress or all of the inputs of society that are on you. And then having those things basically somehow anesthetized or just somehow pushed into the background. And then there you are confronted with reality or yourself. You're looking at yourself in the mirror, more or less. And the way I understood, and so what it seemed to me from the discussions I've, heard from McKenna was the idea that he perceived that everything was speeding up and ultimately time would end. There would be a singularity. Like I say, though, that wasn't necessarily a word I remember him using. But he may well have, okay? I'm just saying I don't believe that was the word he used. And so think about it. So you got Moore's Law, where it's talking about chips every 18 months. The size of a chip is going to shrink. A processing power will increase. And the cost will be reduced. And, you have that moving, and you've got this flow of technology that brought the reason I'm coming to you now from my house, controlling this like a television studio, right? I mean, I'm broadcasting, webcasting, whatever, podcasting. And if you look at the new Apple M1 Max chip, or the M1 Pro, but the M1 Max, that takes, where most people were saying, Moore's Law is done. Well, the M1 Max chip is just thrown is thrown Moore's Law for a total loop. I mean, the power of that thing is just insane. There's billions of it's processes. I mean, a capability of billions of processes, they take place within this thing. Okay. So that's more a law. So McKenna was right, if you think about it. And he, and it's not even, and he was not even aware, he died in 2000, this is 21 years later. So, and at the time, the internet was in its infancy, right? While he was still healthy and still speaking in the late 90s, it was nothing like it is today. I mean, there was no smartphone, there was no apps, there was none of this kind of, none of this insanity that's going on now, right? Technological wise, right? But he saw it enough, and he was clear-headed enough, and that's how he, in his psilocybin trips, whatever, that he saw this thing, just technology and society speeding up and getting faster. And he saw it heading somewhere. And then he had this idea of fractals, right? And so he saw time as almost a fractal thing. And then they created this software program, which I've never seen the software program used. It's a Windows software program that would run on you'd have to have a Windows machine from the 90s and find someone who has an archived copy of that thing. You can't run it on a Mac or a PC today. It's not even available. All right? You'd have to dig deep and find it and have an old machine to run it. But their idea was that, they spent enough time that they broke down time in like I've done on this show before, where I said time isn't linear. And I also disagreed with Einstein, like as time being, space-time, that time's not a part of that, right? And that I saw it more as a circular, in my mind, it was a circular thing, a repetitive, cycle, and and that's hard for some people. Don't want to accept that. They go, I don't understand cycle. What do you mean cycle? It's repetitive. And then the idea of how the whole idea of the clock came about, and why everything is like kind of round. The sun is round. The earth is round. Planets. Everything spins around. The watch, the hands of the clock go around. There's just so many weird concurrences and stuff dealing with this stuff. Well, anyway, McKenna saw it in a little bit different than that. Not a little, a lot different than that. He saw that you can take time, and you could like in a fractal, you can go in, look, dig deeper. He was only able to dig into 92 minutes, all right, at any given time over 4.5 billion years, which I guess he was dealing with the Earth years. But anyway, his idea was that we were at a point where we were going to just speed up so much from a technological standpoint and just life in general, that we were going to hit this thing. And he thought, and again, he was talking in the late 90s now, and he, so he was looking at things like the Mayan calendar, and, and he was doing mushrooms. Let's face the facts. Okay. That he thought 2012, in fact, he, part of the 2012, narrative, he obviously had input into that. And so people thought, okay, 2012 was going to be it, the end of everything. And then it started over again. And that's where the Mayans, kind of the way I look at it, as like the cycle of time. See, what's to say that life, we say the world, when I say what's to say the world didn't end in 2012? Now, when I say the world, you mean the world as in the planet, or as the world turns, the soap opera? No, our world, right? See, the English language is really, is really pathetic when it comes to trying to describe certain things, because we use the same words to describe different things. And sometimes those things are like very different, right? So when I say, what's going on in your world, right? Or that movie, Wayne's World, right? Here's Wayne's World, right? Wayne's World, right? But, you know, and then other people like worlds, when world, you know, Velikovsky, when worlds collide, meaning planets, right? Is there life on other worlds, right? Or like I said before, as the world turns. But like, what about this Mayan idea, or maybe McKenna, you know, going, the world will end in 2012. Well, not the planet, you see, but the world as we know it will have sped up this novelty idea of McKenna's, and that maybe the world did end in 2012. And, you know, the cycle and what we're living now is this new era, you know, this idea, you know, this whole idea of the precession, right, of the equinoxes and stuff, the age of Aquarius and stuff. I mean, just look how screwed up everything is out there right now. And say, is this the same world of 2011? Or is this the same world of 1998 or 1987? Certainly not 1975 or 62, right? So, you know, I've said this before, and it's like, you know, and it sounds so ridiculous and insane to people, but think of in terms of the cycles of life. And so the world ended. You know, the planet didn't end, the world ended. The Mayans were right. The Mayan calendar ended. The world ended. And we're in, you know, we're in like this trying to come back, you know, in this new cycle. It's like infancy, and it's and that's why there's so much, it's so childish, and, you know, and just, you know, it's like it's nonsense. Nothing seems to make sense what's going on now. And when you try to make sense of everything that's going on around you, you can't assign logic to it. I mean, that's one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it is then you got this Apple M1 Max chip, right? And this new technology, and me telling you that this thing is, the days of this are just about ready to end, you know, within the next year or so. And there's new technology coming out. And that kind of throws that idea out of the window and saying, well, so that means we're still moving fast. We're moving even faster. You know, so stuff's still speeding up. And so McKenna was off, you know, and we don't know, in the Mayan calendar, you know, we really don't know what time it is. You know, I should have put, that's an album I have to feature too, by the way. In fact, that's going to be tomorrow's, I'm going to take, you know, feature, because this is right into Chicago album covers. This has something to do with what we're talking about. Okay, this is a classic album. $200 by $200. You got to be kidding me. Got to be a bigger version of that. $355. Hang with me. I mean, the concept of what I'm talking about here is pretty far out. The only thing this is a good one. Chicago had a song And let me go back to Chicago. Does anybody really know what time it is? And that looks like it was from Chicago Transit Authority album. Okay, this album. Oh, you can't see this. I'm sorry. I apologize. You will be able to see this shortly. All right. All right. I apologize for that. I get caught up in these conversations and I forget that sometimes you can see what I'm doing, sometimes you can't. All right, we talked about the Todd Rundgren album. I lost somebody on that one. Sorry, buddy, wherever you are. What I'm trying to get at here is Chicago had an album, and we'll talk about. We'll make Chicago will be a featured artist tomorrow. All right. And I won't necessarily just feature this album, but we'll, because that album wasn't the one where the song I'm talking about. And I'm sorry if I, went off on a deep end there. Chicago, just a line from Chicago was, Chicago, does anybody really know what time it is? And if and again, for YouTubers who go down the rabbit hole all the time, there's this woman, I think her channel's New Earth. And, she's far out, out there. And but she does this research. She's multilingual, so she's got she reads from a lot of these Russian and Eastern European, books, documents, and authors. And she's also one of those people that has put forth this idea of the mud flood theory. And what the mud flood theory is, this will all tie in together. This is a spaced out show. Because this has to do with time and understanding why the Mayan calendar 2012 probably wasn't 2012. Well, I never really subscribed to the mud flood, but certain people did. And the reason they came up with this concept was that when people would be digging under cities, and this was around the world, they would find under buildings, under streets, parts of buildings, but they weren't like they were basements, okay? It was if there was a building under that building. That building was built on a building. And there would be windows and like a floor, not a basement. And there was no logical explanation for that, and this has been found the world over. And so there was an idea that there was this mud flood that happened at some point in the fairly recent past. Remember, you don't know what you don't know. And in this case, everything you know is wrong. And I didn't buy into this completely. I'm thinking, I don't know. It just, until I was watching a documentary about San Francisco fire. And in passing, the person said that they decided to build the city after the fire over top. They were showing these buildings underground, right? Like the New Earth woman, the mud flood. And the announcer just said in passing, and they just went on to continue with other stuff about the Great San Francisco Fire or something like that. They said, well, they had decided that they would just build on the new city on top of the old city, right? and then they moved on to something else. And there were some photos of, these buildings underground, but with windows. They weren't basements. It wasn't like a Roman ruins or something, that, go back thousands of years. You know what I mean? That type of thing. I understand enough that the Earth's constantly being bombarded with like space dust and all kinds of stuff like that. So, over millennia, there's literally a pile up. That's what archaeology, that's what an archaeological dig is, and why they dig in the ground to find something that's like 12,000 years old. Well, the San Francisco fire wasn't 12,000 years ago. It doesn't require an archaeological dig. And so suddenly I looked at that and I go, that woman from New Earth might be right. What didn't they tell us? Remember, you have to look at everyone alive today. Let's take the oldest person on the earth that may be 100, in their hundreds. They could be 140, 160. I talked about that, right? But at least probably in the 120 range, 120, 140 range. Yeah, there are people that old right now, certain places. So the oldest person alive, and most likely they're on an isolated island off Japan or in some mountain community or something like that. But they would be the only person that would have anything firsthand knowledge of anything that happened 140 years ago. Well, and they would be an infant if they were 140. So, say 120, 130 years ago. But in reality, the average person, say in their 90s to 100, at the point of seeing something, say, remembering something when they were 8 or 10 years old, that would mean that these senior citizens in these various care facilities that are in their 90s or 100, at the very most, the only firsthand knowledge, right, that they would have, saw with their own eyes, would be something that was happened 90 some years ago. So roughly 100 years ago, a century. Anything prior to that, we have to take on faith, right? That's history, right? It's history. And so you don't know what you don't know, right? And there's a possibility that what you know is wrong. And so what this mud flood idea is saying, and and there's arguments, and people have legitimate academics have argued this, but it's always come out on the side of the academic as always, right? But the idea that the calendar's been messed with, right? And so we don't know what year it is. So when I say every day it's the calendar year 2021, is it? How do we know? There's no one has any firsthand knowledge, that goes back more than a century or so. Right? And maybe we can directly look into certain things and say, well, yeah, but we have this building and these documents. It's like I say, modern science is only a couple centuries old, right? And the closer you get into the Middle Ages, right, the so-called Dark Ages and stuff, people don't really know what happened. There wasn't a lot of, you go to Gutenberg, whatever that was, 1514, right? Let's see, new window. Let's look at that. Gutenberg. I just try to get the Gutenberg Bible, the Latin Vulgate printed in 1450s by Johann Okay. So the 15th century, so we have that book. But everything's sketchy. Everything's taken upon faith. You don't know, this could be a couple hundred years missing here and there. Or what if there were just 10 years missing? Or what if there were what if somehow in history 2 years were taken away? Right? There was some mud flood or something, or 10, a decade or two. And so when I looked at these buildings under buildings, I said, well, man, you can't build a city. Yeah, it burned, but I mean, you would have to build up over in order to create a foundation to build a city like San Francisco over top of something like that. You see? And then when you would dig down, say, to build a tunnel or something like that, you shouldn't find a building, windows and a structure complete. Because otherwise you're talking about that should have just been burned out buildings and bulldozed and just rubble, right? Sorry for that. The famous white handkerchief. So in some instances of this mud flood idea, I mean, like I say, you got to get in a rabbit hole sometimes. The world over, they have these pictures of where they were digging for tunnels or digging for this or digging in that. And underneath street level, there were like a story, story isn't a story of a building, a 6-story building. There would be like a story with windows and stuff. It wasn't a basement, and it's buried, and it wasn't rubble, and it wasn't destroyed. And so they called it the mud flood. And they say that history has hidden that from you. Right? It's hidden from history. Revisionist history. It's like, so 2012, wasn't really 2012. There may be 10, 20, 50, 100 years missing from our calendar. You wouldn't know. How would you know? Everything you know is someone told you. That's why I'm trying to tell you why with this climate crisis and a lot of this stuff. Like these people say these things because they were taught it by somebody who heard it from somebody. And it was in a textbook written by somebody, right, who thought that to be true. But they had no firsthand knowledge. And that's, and I mean, taken in a very small, weird way is why I don't, watch the nightly news or even have TV anymore. Because these people have a piece of paper in front of them, right? And it's like, and here's the news, or it's on the teleprompter or whatever. But they're just news readers. They don't know what's going on. They don't know for sure. Nobody knows. What do you know? You don't know what you don't know. And now maybe you understand what I'm trying to get across in this show. And so even McKenna, who knows? For all we know, McKenna was right. And this novelty and that everything was speeding up and heading toward this, and to use in modern terms, the singularity. But the singularity, could well be 2046. According to, Doug Vogt, or Ben Davidson, Suspicious Observers, Doug Vogt, Diehold Foundation, studies of Velikovsky and others, and there could be this solar thing that happens cyclically every 12,000 years or whatever. And then this cycle begins all over again. And it's a mud flood. But, that's like a 12,000 year thing. I'm saying, this type of stuff, there could have been some occurrence that happened even in fairly recent history that we're just simply not aware of. because some of these this has been discovered, like I think in the U.S., in different parts of the United States. And the United States supposedly was a bunch of Native Americans migrating with the weather, in order to sustain themselves where there was good hunting or good harvesting, planting, and living. They were migratory tribes, right? So when winter came, they weren't hanging out in Boston necessarily. They were moving south, migrating south. I mean, that's a story we've been told. But do we? I don't know. How would I know? Unless I bring off camera this guy here who's 250 years old, and he comes on and tells you this, what it was like back then, because he was there. Do you want to tell them? No, he doesn't want to tell you that. So, this is the idea, novelty, stuff speeding up, right? You don't know what you don't know, right? The singularity. Where's it all heading to? And why is up, like you hear this, everybody says this, up is down, left is right, right is left. Nothing seems to make sense. Going through the motions of life. But things are speeding up. Well, they can't just keep speeding up ultimately, and that's what McKenna was saying, is ultimately it comes to a point, a breaking point. Comes to this singular point. And so maybe that singular point's 2046. And the sun expels this shell, because this is our world, right? Our solar system. Sol is our sun, our star. It's our solar system. And, so this is our world. This is our existence. So it's real interesting. And so is it all going to come to a head? And is it 2046? Not McKenna's 2012, because we don't know what we don't know, and we have lost touch. There's a missing 20-some years in there, right? At least, right? But, 24 years, approximately a quarter of a century is enough time would make sense and would follow in with this concept of this mud flood. That would be enough time to recover from that and rebuild. Especially if that occurred back at a time, of 100-some years ago, when cities and civilization was just really being built up, right? So it's very fascinating, but it's also a head trip, and you have to admit McKenna was, he was on a head trip. But like I say, one person's, way of dealing with some sort of mind-altering drug is just another person's normal state of being. I mean, that was the thing I always had. I I was always able to be around, people that were extremely, were high when I was in college and stuff. And I could just be hanging out, drinking a beer or something and still laughing and carrying on with the conversation because my head was like, I've always been out there. You see, naturally, kind of. It's that idea of opening up your mind, being open to this idea. You don't know what you don't know. And maybe there's some people when you would say everything you know is wrong, that would be like, how dare you? That's offensive to them. So many people won't even accept you don't know what you don't know. Like as if, well, I know a lot. I've got a master's degree, a PhD, screw you. What do you know? Right? Yeah, they just, these people that just like will not accept the possibility of this. Right? Various deniers of this, deniers of that. But you don't know, and you open your mind and anything's possible. Some people need to take a mind-altering drug to like get to that point where they can go, wow, yeah, far out, man. Other people just basically see life the way it is. Some people look at people and go like, this is crazy, man. This is absurd. Look what's going on. This is nuts. And then there's people like me that, do this.
I would like, if I may, to take you on a strange journey.
Hello. But,
You're listening to Tony Caravan Live.
That's just me. So I would recommend, going down that rabbit hole. Listen to some of McKenna's stuff. There's a couple of videos, I've been out of that stuff for a while because, I've been all over the place and I'm constantly doing stuff. But, there's a couple of videos of him in his house where he's sitting like cross-legged on the floor in like some room and there's some people around him and he's just talking and people are asking questions and weird stuff like that. Some of that stuff. It's pretty interesting stuff. And that was later on in life. And, it's pretty much out there, And he, when he gets into reminiscing and telling stories, particularly about the big story where they first went down and I guess his brother was with him at that time when they went down to South America or someplace like that where they, discovered all this, these mushrooms and got really messed up. And when they went to, beyond the limit of where anyone possibly should have ever taken them. Just interesting stuff. But, the ideas that people come up with. But, yeah, I do. I see things speeding up. I see life as a cyclical, thing. I mean, I believe in the circular nature, of existence, of time. I don't believe in linear time. I don't believe in Einstein's space-time. I think it's just convenient. It was convenient mathematics, there's too much in physics, modern physics, that goes to the chalkboard, and these formulae, complete the idea, right? But it's mathematics. And so it's just like you don't know what you don't know because you have no direct experience of anything that happened 100 years ago or so. And say you had a story of someone who lived longer than that, and you remember as a child them relating that to you. Okay, so that's a couple hundred years. And that's what I try to say about modern science. It's only a few centuries old anyway. But we have all this depth of knowledge that goes back thousands and thousands and thousands of years, if not, well over 10,000 years, maybe longer. And you don't know what you don't know. And there's more of that information than what, these so-called academics are teaching people in college. And then those people go on to get degrees and become professors themselves and teach the same stuff. And so it's caught in this like loop of people teaching this thing. And now the academics are going, and this guy's crazy. This is the way it is. Or here, you look, let me show you on the chalkboard. Do you understand? Such and such, it's such and such, right? Divided by this, taken to infinity is. And I'm like, well, infinity? I still don't, as a child, that was the first thing that set me off. Right? Well, what do you mean infinity? I never, and a lot of people don't think about stuff like that because there is no answer to it, so it's not worth thinking about. Well, I think it's like profound and totally unacceptable that we could say, we don't know what infinity is. Or we can say that, the value of pi continues to, endlessly. Or that the Big Bang, suddenly things just happen. Right? Or black holes. You know what I mean? It's like there's so much acceptance, and these academics are so matter-of-factual about it. And they just, like I say, always go to the board and then just put down some formula. So it's insane. So, it takes a guy like McKenna who was a little bit, who, got out of his mind more than most people did, but at least maybe in the way he dealt with it, it cleared the clutter to kind of put things in a different perspective or just pose a different concept of time, and reality. And it does certainly jibes with things that we are seeing, from Moore's law to the current state of affairs as far as technology is concerned and society. So things are just speeding up. But you can't, you have to reach an end point. And that's all he was saying. Right? And so it's virtually impossible to assign an end date to something, right? And he made the mistake of looking at the Mayan calendar and saying, well, 2012 is the end date. And a lot of people did that. But like I say, we don't know if 2012 was 2012. We just assume it is. We have no idea. I mean, look at the ancient writings. Look how, the Council of Nicaea and stuff. Look how they altered, the Bible, for example, a book, the most highly circulated book, right, in the world, I guess. And, and that thing was messed with. Right? Edited, things were left out, things were put in. Right? And then there was, conflict and different versions. Just to show examples, this is revisionism, right? That's how it happens. And once you get back so many, beyond the point of firsthand knowledge, then you don't know what you don't know. You're taking it on hearsay, right? Unless you can actually see it. It's, see the thing. And I think that's why, that gets back to why I was talking about petroglyphs, like real petroglyphs, and things that were etched in stone very specifically and precisely, so that, to preserve, to say, well, this happened, here, look, it's etched in stone. Remember this will survive. Other stuff won't. And even the Dead Sea Scrolls being thrown in those, jars and then put in this cave to survive, as if to survive some sort of cataclysm. And they did, perhaps survive some cataclysms, or at least time. But, you don't know anything about anything. Like I say, I'm just putting this stuff out there. I'm just saying. And, McKenna was a good guy. And just like I try to do with the music and bring you an album, I'm saying, you may want to check out McKenna, And Freedom is Fun, by the way. Get the shirt. But, and totally unrelated to McKenna, but just because, in my early days of YouTube, rabbit holing, I used to also listen a lot to Alan Watts. And like I say, the two are completely unrelated. But they're from the same, a lot of their talks were recorded, they're from similar eras. But one is a philosopher of, life, and another is, is kind of more or less on the far side of life. So anyway, lots of stuff to think about, ponder. And it's good to ponder, in a world gone mad as the world we live in right now, these kinds of things, they make life, fuller of stuff to think about. And it also makes you realize how absurd politics are. And so when you start looking at these, like Build Back Better, Save America, Great Reset, Nightly News, and all that stuff, it's like, that's like such nonsense. It's silly. It's like childish, right? And you look at these, Peter Pan type of people, and all these me generation, everything's about them, and don't call me this, call me that, don't do this, do that, whatever. Lack of freedom. You start looking at it and you see it like, oh, it's so petty. These people are so petty, ridiculous, and whatever. And so there's plenty of stuff to do out there. And there's plenty of stuff to, for you to think about in your brain and your mind and your consciousness, your higher consciousness. So get my book, Then What? Get the print version. Go to TonyCaravanLive.com. All right.
Good morning.
ROCKFLUX.com. Great solar stuff. Get the shirt, Freedom is Fun, and some of the other shirts. You don't know what you don't know. These are great gifts. Holiday season coming up. They're great things for you to use, great things for you to wear, great ways to communicate. I don't know. It's just a whole world out there, that it's so interesting. That's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to bring